All right, welcome back into Content is for Closers, the show where we talk to entrepreneurs, marketers, and business founders about how they're growing their business through content. We have a unique episode today. I'm excited to get in, but before we do, Carlton, thank you for joining the show. How's it going today?
It's going good. We're just still living the fall life.
Living the fall life. Got a lot of good feedback last week, mainly from myself on our pizza episode. I thought that went well. Enjoyed talking about that.
Just a side note, pizza night last night was great. We just had all of our best friends over, and it was wonderful.
Missed it again.
Rubbing it in.
That's good. Any specific like novelty toppings?
Well, so Julia tried another recipe for dough, and it was pretty good. It was a little thicker. Yeah. So we're starting some plans on a outdoor pizza oven. That's going to be coming to the Riffle homestead soon. So
once we breach a certain threshold here, and I don't know what it is, we'll have to do a Content is for Closers like live episode, and we might need to do it on your property there,
just on the back porch,
hot tub.
There you go. In the hot
pizza,
tub. That's going to be a special segment in the hot tub with Admin Carlton.
That would be, I don't think people would enjoy it, but I would. Anyway, well, we've got a fun episode today. Before we get into the interview with Preston Holland, what's our icebreaker this week, Carlton?
Yeah, so we're going to mix it up this week. We're going to not do a secondary segment afterwards. So that way you guys can, if you get bored of the episode, you can just turn it off early. My question for you, Adam, is have you been in any weird flying scenarios? We're talking about flying today. So have you been in any odd stories involving airplanes or being on an airplane where odd things have happened?
Yeah. So we should clarify most of what Flying Magazine is talking about. And it's actually awesome. If you haven't heard of Flying Magazine, check it out. It's really empowering what I would call like your everyday pilot or your everyday plane owner, which sounds ridiculous, but if you see the magazine or read it,
that's why I subscribe to it.
Yeah, exactly. You'll understand what I'm talking about. I don't have any experiences as a private plane owner because I'm not one, but I have flown a lot commercially, obviously, like the poor masses, for work and things like that. The most interesting, I guess, experience I've had was I flew El Al to Israel from JFK. And it's a very long flight, and it's a, I think I can't even remember, 12 hours over there, I think, or something like that. And the divide, it's the one time that I've seen like overt divide based on race, essentially. And it's like, it's just happening. Yeah. I mean, so if you're Jewish, if you're ethnically Jewish, you're served your food first. And it's obviously kosher food and all this. So the stewardesses make a pass through the entire cabin, serve the ethnically Jewish people, and then come back and serve the Gentiles second.
I wasn't ready for the Gentile language.
I think that's what we're called. And then just randomly throughout the flight, Orthodox Jewish rabbis will be pacing the hall or the aisles doing their prayers. So it's very, the first time I saw it, I just was, completely taken off guard. I'm sitting there reading or watching like The Born Supremacy or something. And someone comes in, they're doing their prayers and walking through the aisle. So it was a super unique experience. What about you?
Experience for sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess there's a couple angles I could take with this, but first of all, I just want to apologize to any specific pilot or airline related people that heard my comment the first time around. If you've been a long time listener to the show for the last 10 episodes, you may have heard some disparaging remarks. I think it was episode 2 or 3.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite moment so far.
And then Adam, of course, had to run with my 2 cents and say that I was a pilot hater. So I'm not a pilot hater. I actually, I've been a long time remote control flyer. So
there we go.
I started off with a little remote control airplane when I was like in 6th grade or 7th grade. So it was like the one Christmas present I just wanted for a long time, and finally got it. And then I had this little note on it. It's like, you cannot fly this in winds over, it was like 10 miles an hour. So like if it was remotely windy at all. And so like I got it, I was super pumped, and my brother sees that, and they just like seize the day to make fun of me. And they're like, Carlton, we live in the Windy City. And they're just like, ah. And sure enough, like I had very, very rough time trying to fly that thing. I like took it out to our field one day, flew it maybe 10 seconds after it got in the air. It was going great. It just hit a little gust of wind, stalled out at maybe, 100 feet, flipped, and just went straight down,
Man.
broke into a million pieces. So now I fly drones. I'm a avid drone flyer.
So we are kind of compacting our segments here before the interview, and then we'll get into it with Preston in a second. But normally at the end we would do our "Have You Heard" segment and give folks something that we've learned or heard in the past week. What have you heard, Carlton, that you think would be relevant or helpful for the listener?
Yeah, so something that is pretty exciting this week for me is piece of software that I used for about the last year. It's called Bubble.io. It's a no code or low code app builder. Really looked at as kind of the big player in this space, as far as if you want to build a full featured app that has full featured authentication and can handle a large database. Bubble is kind of the go-to no code builder for that. So they just came out with a brand new, redeveloped, totally from the ground up responsive engine, and just make your products, make your websites, whatever you build on there, a lot more responsive. So that's in beta still, but it was really cool to try that out over the weekend and kick the tires. So
For those of you who are Herd customers, that responsive engine will be driving part of our app that would be customer facing eventually. Is that right?
yeah, yeah,
So that,
absolutely. So we
yeah,
were
so
kind of waiting a little bit till that came out, and
mhm.
then being able to push ahead with making everything mobile friendly. And you could, before, it was just really kind of clunky, and the way that you had to do it, it was just took a long time. So now, kind of as you're building it, you can have the same workflow, same page driving everything. And
Very cool. We get into it a little bit today, but Preston talked about briefly the fact that Craig Fuller, who's the owner of Flying Magazine, acquired it and then is using a lot of the media components that we discuss on the episode to build it, to build it up just like he did with Freight Waves. And Preston's at the charge of that. But I've been really obsessed recently. The way Craig acquired it was via something called an SBA loan. And if you're not familiar with SBA loans, if you're into business or into acquiring a business or thinking you might want to run a business at some point, they're really, really interesting. They're provided by the government. They require, if you're a new investor, a new entrepreneur, they require only 10% down versus the value of the business, and then you have 10 years to pay off the interest or the rest of that loan. And to me, it's just fascinating as a financial device because it really, like, it makes acquiring and then operating a business a real legitimate option
yeah,
for a lot of people.
very
And
attainable.
there's so many businesses that are available. You could go on microacquire.com, flippa.com, just bizbuysell.com, where, whether it be digital or retail, brick and mortar, etc., businesses, there's people always trying. And right now we're in a flood of people exiting their businesses because they're ready for retirement. Like,
Yeah.
that generation is moving on. So anyway, for anyone interested, we touch on it very, very briefly on the episode, but I've been digging into that and studying it and really enjoying that process. So check out SBA loans if you hadn't heard of them before.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. Well, I think this was a great episode. Everyone, I think you'll really enjoy it. I enjoyed talking to Preston and getting to pick his brain about growing a media company. So without rambling on any further, let's get to the episode with Preston Holland. Preston Holland is the VP of Product Development at Flying, a media company established in 1927 as the go-to source for current and aspiring pilots. Preston is responsible for the build-out and commercialization of new digital media products, and he leads a team to develop attractive new offerings for flying customers. I think Preston is adept at understanding audience intent and designing media products and experiences to drive engagement simultaneously. The flying team is doing some incredibly innovative work, from creating new events for subscribers to building an entire resort that is dedicated to creating immersive experiences for private pilots. During the episode, we discussed how the acquisition of flying came to be, Preston's process for creating new concepts, and how content drives in real life engagement with flying customers. I thoroughly enjoyed this episode and think you will too. In the words of one of my son's favorite Paw Patrol, let's take to the sky with Preston Holland. Preston, thanks for joining the show with us.
Hey, Adam, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you and I connected on Twitter, realized very quickly we have probably too much in common. I feel like we've already had a couple of late night text conversations about launching products and things like that. And immediately knew as we were talking that I needed to get you on and talk about your experience, kind of transitioning flying. And I'd love for you to explain what's going on with that. And now trying to grow it as well. So tell us a little bit about what is Flying Magazine? How did you get there? What are you trying to do with it?
Yeah, so Flying Magazine was started in 1927, and it was really centered around Amelia Earhart's flight, right? That's the kind of the launching point for Flying Magazine. And it's had a couple of different names. Popular Aviation is one of them. There's an entire Wikipedia page if you're interested in kind of learning a bit about the brand. Cool. There is some documentation about that out there, kind of given a history, but essentially it's a blue chip brand in the aviation space. So this is a niche publication specifically targeted at pilots and people who love aviation. So there's a couple of different sectors of people that read it, right? You have professional pilots. That might be somebody who flies a business jet. That might be somebody who flies an airliner. It could be a variety of people at the professional level. A lot of that crosses over into a general passion for aviation. So that would be known as general aviation, right? So that's going to be kind of what you think about with small planes, right? So you think Cessna 172, or you think about Piper aircraft, or, kind of these smaller aircraft. Those are passion for people. And a lot of those airline pilots will retire with a significant amount of expendable income, and then they'll continue on as a hobby. And so they love aviation. They're super passionate about it. So we have a really engaged audience. And I think that that's really what attracted us when we were looking at, kind of niche media acquisition targets.
Very cool. So it's a magazine media company talking to these enthusiasts. And is the core business currently around advertising? Is it a subscription-based business? Maybe give us a little taste of that.
Yeah, so it's a legacy publisher, right? So as it came from 1927, right? There's a wide history of business models as you look at it, and as you look at the evolution of media businesses. As it currently sits, and that we've been transitioning from, is it's primarily advertiser driven when it comes to, you talk about cost versus, where's your return at? The return's at the advertiser side. The subscription model pretty much only covers its own cost, maybe breaks even, maybe loses a few dollars. Okay. Just kind of depends on the subscriber, what the channel they came through. And so it is primarily advertiser driven. There's a huge history with this brand, right? Aviation is a really small industry. And so you have executives that are making these decisions that grew up reading Flying Magazine. They love the brand, right? And so they have this huge love for the brand as a whole. So a lot of that brand loyalty comes and is really ingrained in a lot of these decision makers from the advertiser side. And so really what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to transition from an advertiser driven model to a subscription driven model, right? So when you look at from a monetization standpoint, the subscriber model is long-term. Apple, Google, Facebook, everybody is kind of clamping down on privacy, and, your targeting and retargeting is becoming more and more difficult. So for us as a niche publication, we have the eyeballs of the readers. So the advertisers don't necessarily have to wonder, is this actually my target market? Because the content that they're reading, it is the target market. There is not a question. Joe off of the street or Sally off of the street is not going to just pick up a copy of Flying Magazine and find a lot of the content super intriguing, right? You have to love it. in order to read it. So, niche publications have had a wide evolution, right? I think in the, you look at like the late 90s, early 2000s as kind of the digital revolution kind of came through. A lot of legacy media publications didn't make that switch to kind of the subscriber driven model, even though they had this highly engaged brand and this highly engaged user readership. And so that's really what we saw the opportunity as. And, when we made the acquisition, that was kind of one of our big goals, is to take it from ad driven to subscriber driven revenue.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously your group hasn't owned it since 1920 or whatever. So it's a newer acquisition. It's something that you all are coming into now, and I think so. The whole point of our show is talking about how can you leverage content in order to start a business, to grow a business, but essentially to make money, right? Because that's what people are trying to figure out. So when you all are coming to it, what is the theory behind buying a existing legacy brand, and obviously it has an existing audience, versus just starting one from scratch? And like, how did you all come up with, or what are some of the levers you're thinking through as you're going through that process?
Yeah, so our founder and CEO of Flying Media Group, that is kind of the parent company that owns Flying Magazine now, is Craig Fuller. He has been a pilot since he was in his late teens, grew up around aviation, loves it. He actually owns 2 aircraft himself,
I didn't know that.
light sport aircraft. Yeah, so he owns an Icon A5, and then he just recently bought another, light sport aircraft.
Cool.
So we've been doing a building in public. So if you want to go check it out, flyingmag.com. It's Taking Off in Public is the name of the series. So Craig kind of talks about the development. And in one of the articles, he was talking about how the beauty of Flying Magazine is that there is so much trust there with the user readers that you would have to build from scratch. If you were to build it from scratch, right, you have to build that trust. In acquiring a brand, you are acquiring that trust with the readership. And so therefore, as you take them on that journey, and then you prove to them, hey, we're here to invest in you, right? So I think, one of the questions that a lot of people ask me is, what's your head count? And to be completely honest, we are hiring journalists so fast that I can't keep up with head count right now. And that is a direct investment into the brand and into the community, right? So this whole idea about community first and content for a community. In acquiring a media organization, you're actually purchasing that brand loyalty, that brand trust, and able to leverage that and then, develop that not just in media properties, but then you're able to monetize it in so many other ways, not just in advertiser driven revenue, right? You have affiliate linking, you have, just talking about like traditional publisher revenue streams, subscription models and things like that. But then you can also even pivot that into real life examples, because your audience is so engaged with you and they trust you. And, it's your job not to mess that up and not to lose their trust and continue to invest into the community. And so that, I think, is the main reason behind purchasing a brand, right? Is you're buying that brand loyalty and also that subscriber base. So you're not having to teach new people, hey, this is what our product is. People already know in the community.
Right. Okay. But is that tricky at all? Like in the sense of, this brand has existed forever. It does have a very rabid, loyal fan base. And then I feel like it's almost like when you have like your favorite restaurant or something, like a taco shop that you just love. And then all of a sudden it's like under new management. You're like, oh no, I hope the tacos still I hope they still have that guac, because that guac was like my favorite thing I've ever had. How have you been able to bridge that gap and assure the incumbent audience that's been with them forever, hey, the guac's still good, while offering these new products and bringing in new talent and all that?
Yeah, so Flying has been owned by a media conglomeration for the past 10 years. And before that, it's kind of traded media hands. And they were a carrier of the brand for a while, and they did a great job, right? They didn't ostracize the community or kill the brand, but it wasn't necessarily their sole focus, right? Flying was one of multiple titles that was underneath this big umbrella corporation. So one thing that we're working through is communicating to the community that look, this is what we're doing. Flying magazine is it. It is all about flying. We don't have a writer that's writing about other content. They're only writing about aviation. We're not going to have podcasts that are coming out in adjacent fields. We're not going to have a yachting podcast. We're not going to have maybe another, like a Porsche or something like that, maybe like another niche, right? It's all about flying. So one way that we're communicating that is that taking off in public. And it's actually performed really well for us. Craig will write an article about, this is what he's thinking about, or this is where the direction of flying is going. And the community is responding. I mean, reader numbers on those are in the week, they're usually in the top 2 or 3. And if, it comes out once a week, it usually comes out on Mondays. And so it'll sit in the top slot for 2 or 3 days because the community wants to know what's going to happen to this blue chip brand that I love so much. And so, we're trying to communicate to them like, hey, we're serious. We are making an investment here. This is a passion project for Craig, our founder. And for him, he's not here trying to just, suck all the life out of it and get any dollars that he can and then moving on. It's, he is a steward of the brand. That's, what we keep talking about is, he gets to hold on to flying for right now, and get to grow it. So I think communicating to the community is very important of this is what my intentions are and this is what we're going to do, and then prove it. Right. And that's what we've been doing by, hiring more and more content writers and content creators, in order to double down kind of on that brand.
Very cool. And we'll link that in the show notes below, down in links and resources if you want to check it out. You sort of brought up Craig is doing that one concept of showing, hey, this is where we're headed. This is how we're doing it. And I think that's a great idea, very transparent. What process do you use internally? And this is more, I think, interesting for people who are either trying to, whether they bought it or not, just trying to build up a media platform and establishing new concepts, new shows. That's something that we get asked a lot, actually, is like, I have this idea. How can I vet it? Or what is the process I need to take in order to validate that it's a good idea? And I'm sure you all are having that conversation regularly. So maybe take us behind the curtain a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a really sharp editorial team. So guy by the name Mark Spohr is running our digital editorial team. And then our managing editor for the print side of the house and kind of our content expert. Her name's Julie Boatman. She has been in the industry for forever. She's an iconic name, very technical, very, very smart, very kind. I really like Julie, really have enjoyed getting to work with her. But cool. Mark is kind of helping to package up new content ideas in I guess vertical stacks, right? So you have, if you think about digital media, right, you've got a couple of different properties. You have newsletters, you have podcasts, you have video series, you have enterprise pieces, you have columns, you have your website. So you have a lot of options when it comes to how you're going to package that content. So what we'll do is, somebody will have an idea. A lot of times that idea originates in Slack and it usually ends up starting about 9:00 at night and doesn't finish until like 11:30. And you'll wake up the next morning to 30 Slacks of, oh yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yeah. So that'll kind of be, the brainstorming process. And you talk about asynchronous work. That's a huge topic right now with COVID, about people working not at exactly the same time, but able to collaborate. And there's a lot of tools coming out for that. We just use Slack. I mean, just, let's have a brain dump. Yeah. So Mark will take that concept, right? And then he will package it in a way that makes sense for engagement, for readership. How can we package it? What type of technical resources do we have in order to, package up that content? And then from there, you can take it and you can turn it into multiple media properties. So you think about an idea of a column, right? That is the traditional, you think about a newspaper column, you think about a magazine column, right? We have one called I Laughed. I learned about flying from that. It's a column that's been written in the magazine for years and years and years. I wrote down, we're on column number 800, I think, for I Laughed. Wow. And that's actually been turned into a podcast, right? So it's the same concept in an audio format, right? So you're not having to recreate any sort of content. you're just packaging it in a way that is consumable by multiple people, right? So I'm a podcast listener. I don't really read, like, I read Morning Brew every morning, but I don't read like a column, right?
Yeah.
I don't go to a destination. I don't have a Wall Street Journal subscription. It really frustrates me to get in front of their paywall because I'm like, I'm not going to pay because I'm not coming back here. I just want to read this one article. So usually I'll just fork out the $3, whatever they're going to charge me to read that one article. But for a podcast, I'll pop it on while I'm driving down the road if it's something that interests me, if it's something I'm passionate about. And so the idea of packaging content in multiple mediums in order to deliver it in different ways is something that we're really thinking about. And that's something that flying has started to do, but they didn't necessarily have the resources in order to double down on that idea. And so that's one of our big goals right now, is to double down on that content distribution. And it doesn't necessarily have to be brand new content. You can even pull historical content that you've written before that's not timestamped, and you can put it into a different medium. We've got a new column starting soon. It's going to be Finance Fridays, right? So Finance Fridays is going to be all about how to own an aircraft in an efficient, economical manner, right? So owning an aircraft is very expensive. You have fuel costs, you have insurance costs, you have financing costs to purchase the actual aircraft itself. You're looking at anywhere from $150,000 to $5 million to $15 million. You want to buy, up in the Gulf Stream. I mean, you can get really, really expensive with private jets.
Sure.
But a lot of times people don't understand how to make that make financial sense for their business, right? For instance, you would be surprised what the tipping point is from a commercial aviator perspective, like going commercial aviation versus private. The tipping point is not where necessarily everybody thinks. It's somewhere in like the 7 to 10 people range if you're trying to move them to where all of a sudden it becomes, this might make sense, right? I know there's a CPA firm here in Chattanooga that flies private for that reason, right? You also have depreciation expenses that you can write off against. There's a lot of financial tools that you can use in order to make aircraft ownership more approachable. But there's not a ton of great resources out there. There are some. There's associations that put out some resources and things like that. But we're wanting to be the central, that column is going to be kind of the central point. Well, what can you do with a column? You can turn a column into a newsletter easily. I mean, it's pretty much copy and paste. Yeah. Right? You can turn that into a podcast. You can have somebody from, a representative from an insurance company on to say, hey, how do we do this? How do we technically do this? There's a ton of different content options there, and you're not having to recreate the wheel for a podcast, for a newsletter, for a column, for a video series that lives evergreen on your website or on YouTube or something like that for discoverability. So really figuring out a way. That's one example, and we're talking about building out multiple media properties in that same idea, and distributing it across mediums.
I love that, because so many legacy companies, or even not media companies, just older businesses get stuck on the idea of, and there could be even new media, like, well, we have hundreds of blog posts, and so like we don't want to have to start something new. And it's like, you don't have to start something new in the sense that you have to come up with a whole new concept and all, especially if you have hundreds or thousands of posts. Obviously that's working for you. It's just finding new distribution channels in order to re-leverage and get more new life out of that. So I love that you all are kind of breathing new life into evergreen content that way. We talked earlier, and I know you all have a moniker internally, but maybe transition us out of content for a second, because most of what we talk about is content related. But the fact is, ultimately, this is a business show. And what we're trying to do is help people figure out how to drive revenue through some content related thing. And you all have done this, I think, particularly well, and have plans to do it even more in the future by using content as a jumping off point for other products and experiences. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there's this idea about content to commerce, right? So you think about content is the authority, and your brand creates authority through that content, right? So as you're putting out, let's say you're a small business, and let's say that you're putting out content, not necessarily about how do I build a small business. That's a different market, right? let's say you're putting out content, 7 ways to effectively wash your dog outside, right?
Mhm.
That the reason that comes to mind is I got stung by a hornet cleaning my dog outside the other day.
Oh,
So let's say you're a dog groomer and you're giving out this free content, right? 7 ways to wash your dog outside. That's a terrible example because I don't think there's 7 ways. It's a hose, it's a mop, it's a bucket, whatever. But the idea stands true, right? Your audience now sees you as the authority on dog washing. They also see the pain points that they're having in washing their dog. What's the solution? You are the solution, right? You're moving them from an idea of content, right? I'm going to put out this, I'm going to create myself as the authority figure in whatever it is that I'm talking about. That can be about aviation, that can be about freight, right? Craig's other business, Freight Waves.
sure.
You're creating this idea of brand authority, and then you identify a pain point, and then you offer a solution, an immediate solution that has low friction, low barrier to entry, easy, and you can do that as many times as you want, right? I think that as you think about content, content is great, and you hear all the time, you need to be blogging, you need to be having a newsletter. Why do you have a newsletter, right? Why does a restaurant have a newsletter? That newsletter is not going to make money on its own. You're probably
Right.
not going to have somebody sponsor your newsletter if you're a restaurant, but your newsletter creates you as an authority, and then you're serving up a solution. Book reservation now, one
Yep.
click reservation, whatever platform you want to use. So that's kind of the idea that we're taking with Flying, right? Is it's a blue chip brand, right? We have a dedicated, loyal following. We're going to continue to invest in that content that they expect, that the community expects, right? But then when you talk to that community as an authority, you have the opportunity to give them something that they want and you can provide, right? So you can monetize that in a way that others might not be able to, right? So
Sure.
you're able to make, and the other beautiful thing about having a community that consumes your content is you can ask them what they want. You can say, you can come up with creative ways to say, what do you want? Let's go back to the taco example that you had mentioned earlier about, under new management.
Mhm.
What we're doing, instead of saying, hey, the guac isn't changing and we're adding tacos, we're asking, what do you love about the guac? And what do you not like about the guac? We'll get rid of that part. We're going to double down on the guac side. And then we're also going to offer you tacos, a lounge experience. We're going to open a bar. We're going to create an environment that you want to hang out in, right? Because you are a community that loves Mexican food, right?
Mhm.
That's the idea of a community. So all of a sudden, you're now a taco stand that didn't make $3, charge your customer $3 for guac. You might make $1, maybe make $1. It depends. Labor costs are insane right
Avocado
now.
pricing. Yeah.
Avocado prices, supply chain, it's all messed up. But you might make $1. Okay, you made $1 off of a $3 guac. But how about instead you ask, what do you like about the guac? Hey, my community knows that I care. My community knows, or I know about my community that they also want tacos and queso, and they also want a great bar with live music. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All of a sudden, you've now sold them a couple of drinks, high margins on drinks, right? Because that's what they wanted. You knew that it was a high margin opportunity, so you served it to them. Tacos might be a high margin item for you. And the community may ask for something that you may not be able to make money on, but you give it to them to build trust with that
Sure.
community.
And the experience.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it, on the Flying side, is that there are opportunities that we have that people are asking for. And there are things that the community wants, and we're going to be able to provide that for them, through whether it's, there's a lot of things that our community that we've already heard that they're expecting and that they want, that nobody's providing. So we're able to listen to that and then provide that at a margin that makes sense.
Yeah, this is really important. Webb Smith calls this concept linear commerce, where you can start with a content platform, or you have an existing media business in your case, and then you use that to suss out the customer needs, as you're saying, as well as use it for product development. And I think a lot of people get caught in the reverse. Whether you actually have the media platform or not, the idea behind it is using this this arm that you have, this media arm, in order to connect, engage, listen more effectively, to then inform your product development, like you said, when it comes to, do you want this type of taco or whatever. And that can be done whether you have a existing media company like Flying or not. You could have 100 Twitter followers and do the exact same thing if you're leveraging your content correctly. So love that idea. Love the idea of content to commerce. I think as we go forward, that's going to end up being kind of the status quo. You keep seeing these companies who either buy or create media arms in order to do audience development and over time, really just like buy market share. And I think that's going to continue to be the norm. So you guys are definitely ahead of the game there.
So I think when you look at a macro trend when it comes to media companies, right, you see HubSpot purchasing the hustle and trends with the My First Million guys. And now they're creating a HubSpot podcast network where they're actually creating content. Yeah. Great idea. Morning Brew selling a piece of their business to Business Insider, right? Business Insider is purchasing an audience that they can't reach, right? It's the me's, it's the you's, it's the people that, are reading a different brand of content, right?
And hate paywalls, by the way.
Oh,
because Insider is always hitting you with that paywall. But yes, I agree completely.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that as you look at like a macro trend, I think that we are right at the beginning of that. Where there are these content creators, right, and these huge companies want to buy them once they hit a certain scale, right? But you can walk this back into all segments of the market, right? We're taking a bit of a reverse approach to that. So we're buying the media company, and then I don't know what our product's going to be, but we will have a product that is outside of the media arm.
And that's the best way to do it, because now you have the belief, you have the customer. To your point about Business Insider, you have the millennials opening the emails, and you can kind of let them help you decide what those products end up being, right?
Right, exactly. And all in the meantime, if you're agnostic like Morning Brew is, you can drive revenue via sponsorships, and it all pays for itself, right? So you're not actually laying out money in order to create that content. The Hustle is taking a bit of a different approach. They eliminated all outside advertising, and all of it is internal HubSpot advertising. I think it's just a different approach. I don't think one's better or worse. I think that HubSpot has a much bigger vision, and they've been in the content game for a long time. So an acquisition like the Hustle makes a lot of sense. They've been doing training and media creation for a long time. But I think on the macro level, I think that we're going to continue to see that. I think Salesforce purchasing Slack is a lot different than HubSpot purchasing the Hustle. It's a much different acquisition. And I think that, the numbers, I don't know if it's a direct correlation, but if you look at trends, if you look at stock price, it's a much different outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I heard the My First Million guys. If I can find it, I'll have Tristan throw it in here. But they talked about the stock price ramifications of after buying the Hustle, and I think they were like stupid significant in terms of the stock growth. So, Preston, really appreciate you coming on here and kind of explaining why a company should consider buying a media brand, really, and then how to grow one. The last question we ask every guest is, if you had $150,000 to spend on growth, let's just call it. And I know that's not like crazy amount of money, but I think it's a practical amount for a lot of our listeners. How would you do that? And you can either do it for Flying or not, but how would you spend that money specifically?
Yeah. So I think with a budget like that, I think, specifically with Flying, I would stand up some sort of a scrappy podcast. Podcasting continues to have the bar lowered as far as, how hard it is to get into podcasting. David Sachs just released a new product called Call-In this week. That lowers the bar even lower to create like a live call-in type show. That's hence the name. Very clever. But what I'd do is I'd stand up a podcast, right? You can have them produced and edited and made very professionally for not a lot of money. And then I'd use the remaining budget to promote that on other podcasts, right? So you want to have your promotion in front of eyeballs of similar users that are not currently listeners, right? So I think I'd do a study of any aviation podcast, and I would, look at allocating budget to them to try and drive some listener growth. And, as you look at, return on investment, I think that could have hockey stick implications, as you look at listener growth and what you can charge advertisers for those years.
Yeah, not enough people are doing this. Our very first episode of the show was with the head of growth for a company called Rudderstack. His name's Eric Dodds, and he talked about spending paid dollars to evergreen content, and that could be some that they created themselves. But he also talked about either licensing or whatever you want to call it, other people's content. I think that's a really interesting idea because you are essentially buying audience share online and driving it back to your owned media asset. And some of that won't stick, of course, some of that's going to churn. But by and large, if they're interested in whatever it is that you're promoting, they're probably going to end up opting into your audience overall. It's kind of like you said earlier. If you pick up Flying Magazine and you read it, like you have to be the target customer. There's no other reason to engage, right? So it's a little different, but it's a similar strategy in what you're describing of standing up a show, standing up a concept, and then using that paid media to go to people who are like-minded and saying, hey, you like this show, come listen to ours. It's super similar. So yeah, like great idea, great answer. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I think this has been really helpful for the audience. Before we go, how can people keep up with what you're doing at Flying or just connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to connect with me is on Twitter. I'm on there a fair amount. My username is @Preston, my first name, Holland, and the number 6. I have messaged Preston Holland on Twitter a couple of times to ask how much it would cost to get my name. I own PrestonHolland.com.
Nice.
But
does he use it? Does Preston Holland use it?
He hasn't used it in like 2 years. And so it's frustrating that I'm like, it's just sitting there. So
unreal. Preston, let it go.
Yeah. @Preston Holland, if you're listening, I'll give you a lot of money.
Cool. And Flying Magazine is
flyingmag.com.
Flyingmag.com. So we'll link all of that in the show notes below. But again, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam.